Peace and blessings, everyone. Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Edjuenka, and tonight we are going to talk about outsourcing of jobs. You heard the Minister Walwin, the Minister of Education and Culture, in the House of Assembly and on the Sept news clip, talk about how trust companies, the bigger trust companies, are buying up the smaller trust companies and laying persons off, and many of those persons are Virgin Islanders, and the challenges, the social challenges that can result from those types of layoffs, where mostly female employees losing their jobs. Some of them are head of households, and how that impacts the family structure from that perspective, and how it impacted children, and then what social impact that would have in terms of development, in terms of crime, jail, and all those ramifications. But we're going to talk about those social issues stemming from that behavior. But we're going to also talk about outsourcing in general, and we're going to talk about its broader economic impacts and implications. So you keep it locked right here. And when I come back with my guest, Shawande, we're going to really get in and dig down deep into this outsourcing, because it's not just a laying off of local employees. We're talking about outsourcing in the legal profession. A lot of local lawyers are having difficulty meeting ends meet because we have these bigger international law firms coming in and gobbling up the market share that our local lawyers should have. And there's a whole host of interrelated economic events that's taking place in the Virgin Islands that we need to pay attention to and take a good look at, because these things are going to have significant impact on our ability to provide food, clothing, and shelter for ourselves, ability to pay our mortgages, ability to do all the things, pay our bills generally, and do all those things that we need to do in this community, and the economic hardship that this type of behavior by these companies is going to cause. You keep it locked right here to Spotlight, because when we come back, we're going to get down into some serious economic issues regarding outsourcing of jobs in the community. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
This program is sponsored by the law firm of J.S. Archibald & Co. and by the trust company J.S. Archibald Trust Services Limited, both of Roadtown, Tortola, BVI.
Welcome back to Spotlight. I want to welcome my guest, Brother Shawande Uhuru.
Yes, thank you for having me, Edjuenka. I'm usually with you on a Thursday, but it's a pleasure to be here, and with the viewing audience here on Spotlight and JTV. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I have to thank you for coming, because it was short notice, and I have to say that there's brothers and sisters who my real brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
When I get in a jam, I got people who I could call on to take me out to the jam, who are always prepared, who don't need no special briefing.
Just
who don't need to know what the topic is.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
And it's an important topic, so
yeah.
It needs to be spoken about. So I'm glad we have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah. Well, we heard you heard the minister, right? Did you?
I did. Yeah, I did hear the minister.
And he was talking about how trust companies were buying up the smaller trust companies. Of course, we spoke about it a few weeks ago on Umoja, how one trust company bought another trust company and brought in some Sri Lankans for the local people to train, to send them back to Sri Lanka to outsource the work to Sri Lanka and lay off the local people.
Yeah, so it's a real undignified position to be in for the workers there, to have to train workers. I'm not exactly sure who was laid off and who was doing the training, but it's very undignified to be put in a situation where you're training people who will actually be taking your job. And I'm sure many of the workers were, probably didn't even know whether they were being laid off or not. It was probably some big secret. and just to get the indication that you won't have a means of paying your rent and for, you know, buying groceries and paying your bills must be a very insecure position to be in.
Horrifying position.
My heart really goes out to the employees of that particular company that lost their jobs and are losing their jobs.
Yeah, and I want to say at this particular point, Shaw, one day that this is what we have been hearing, and persons who have spoken with said that this is perhaps as close to the truth as you can get. I don't know for sure that this is what actually happened to the detail, but something is happening in that way, because I call late and I try to check the facts out. I always try to check the facts out. And I want to say this because I want the government to know the challenges the media has in gathering information and gathering accurate information, and how important it is for the administration, the government, to say to the civil servants that, you know, you can give out information that is not confidential, that is not private, and not about any personal business of individuals. Because I call the Labor Department, and I was figuring like this: if I find out, for example, how many work permit applications were processed over a period of time. Because I heard this, I heard the layoff thing as a rumor. So I was checking it out, and I figured if I call the Labor Department and I ask a question over a specific period of time, how many work permit applications were processed, and out of those that were processed, how many of those applications were for people from Sri Lanka, right? Now, I'm not asking about the names of the people. I'm not asking about the names of the company that filed the applications. I'm not asking anything that's personal. All I need to know is two sets of information. Over a 7-month period, 1,000 work permit applications were filed. Out of that 1,000, 18 were Sri Lankans. That's all I needed to know.
That should be public knowledge.
I mean, what is the difficulty in getting an answer to those two simple questions? Well, I mean, it was just unbelievable, the challenges I experienced with the Labor Department.
Just to gain those 2 bits of information. And so when, you know, and when my good friend, Honorable Walwin, chastised the online media and other media houses, and you know, I understand, because we had the same challenges with some of the online media as well. Absolutely.
In terms of reporting accurately, in terms of sensationalization, and so on. But also too, there is a situation where information, accurate, timely information, is difficult to get.
Absolutely.
And I think the government needs to make the information more readily available and instruct the civil servant as to exactly what can be given out and what can be given out. But having said that, we got this information, and it turned out that a number of Sri Lankans had work permits were processed, and so it sort of solidify or give credence, I should say, give credence to the rumor that this thing was actually taking place. And then, of course, we heard the minister talking about it in the House of Assembly and on the radio. So now we know that there's something in the matter besides the pestle, as they would say.
I don't know the specifics of the information, but in order to lay off people like that, some kind of justification most time is presented to the government and, you know, to employees themselves. A lot of time they tell you don't have the qualified people. They try to explain to you that you don't have the work ethic to do the job. But if we're really honest about it, outsourcing is something that happens all over the world, and it's mainly to increase the profits on behalf of the shareholders. This is mainly what it is. And of course, Sri Lanka is a low-wage destination, and they would not be paying some of the high salaries that they're paying here. Now, I was looking at a statement by the Honorable Kedrick Pickering, which was actually made before this information became public. And I found it very interesting that he seems to possibly make reference to this thing before it happens. And he says, Madam Speaker, we are paying particular attention to the highly specialized in the medical field, financial services and the like, to ensure that commerce continues uninterrupted as much as possible. Firms have made and will continue to make decisions that ensure their survival, especially in this very competitive climate. Therefore, we can realistically expect that when a firm has to lay off workers, that some of those workers will be BVI landers, which seems to, in my opinion, sanction the action taken by these law firms, because, as the minister says,
Trust companies.
These trust companies have to ensure their survival in a highly competitive economy. Now, I don't think anybody can really say that these trust companies in the Virgin Islands are struggling. When you have corporate takeovers, and I mean, these are things that you do to increase your profits primarily. And of course, you want to reduce your costs whenever possible to increase the profits on behalf of your shareholders.
And when you buy out a company that's competing with you, that reduces your competition as well.
Absolutely. You want to grab up more market share. And most times what happens is the worker suffers as a result of these type of policies. Let me just say, I know a lot of people who work for trust companies, and very intelligent people. Very, very smart people. In fact, in the private sector, you have to perform when you're in the private sector. A lot of people look at government as being less demanding, and I would say to a certain extent that has to be true because of how we're speaking about the owners of the companies operate. They're trying to get the most out of you as possible. And many of these people who work for the trust companies, I mean, I know people who work in 16, 17 hours a day for some of these trust companies. I'm telling you, they have a difficult time even spending time with their children. They have a difficult time having a social life. They come home tired, stuff like that.
And they're working on weekends.
Hard working individuals.
And as a matter of fact, while you're on that subject, and keep your thought because we don't want to get distracted, but that has brought about in this community something that we've never had before. Latchkey children.
Absolutely.
Children who, by the time they get up, their parents are gone to work.
Yeah.
And they have the key, and they get some chips or Coke or whatever, and or some Cheerios in a bowl, and they put some milk on it, they eat that, get dressed, and they go to school. And then when they get home at 3, 4 o'clock, and their parents come home at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and they are sleeping, or the television is watching them, and
and this is happening so that individuals can get enough money to pay the bill and put food on the table. It's having a real severe social impact, and this is because the people who own many of these companies, they do not have any recognition or any they don't consider their own social responsibility in terms of building the society. They only want to build their profits. And so, and after you've gotten all that you've gotten out of the workers, you then outsource the jobs because you don't really consider the impact it's going to have on the society.
You want more.
Yeah, but that's where the government comes in. Okay, the government has to be the social conscience of the society. The government has to ensure that people are employed. If you take a look at the United States of America, for instance, you see whenever the employment figures are released, it's either going to have a negative or positive impact on the perception of the president. Right now, President Barack Obama, if he has a negative job report, that's, he makes a statement, a negative or positive one, he's going to make a statement about it. And we've said this over and over. I mean, he's he's in charge of the executive branch of the government in the United States. He's not running a company, but yet he's so much concerned with the employment numbers. That's because they recognize in the United States of America that employment is ensuring employment is an important function of the government. I'm not quite sure if here in the Virgin Islands that message has really gotten through clearly. It seems as though with our relationship with the foreign investor in particular, we're concerned very much with the taxes that we are getting, if not payroll tax and some of the fees that they pay to government, but then we're not putting as strong an emphasis on employment and other areas such as your corporate responsibility, how you're going to function within the environment, protecting the environment and so on. I think we need to be more demanding of companies. And I recognize as well that the financial services sector contributes a large portion of the government revenue. I understand that you cannot...
Over 60%.
Over 60%. And you cannot take actions that will scare them away or cause them to get up and go to another jurisdiction. But you have to recognize as well that they do not have all the leverage in the situation.
Well, it seems to me though that our governments, all our governments, think that they do, and I think I disagree with you in the sense that our governments and I don't pay particular interest in the jobs.
Okay.
I think they do. But I think it seems as though they have to balance how many people is going to get laid off from this company versus how many people can be laid off overall. So it's like, you figure if we have one company that's outsourcing or laying off Virgin Islanders, people working here, then they only laying off 50 people or 25 people. That's not as bad as if you make a fuss about the laying off of that 25 people, how much they may lay off if they get upset and move to another jurisdiction, and others follow suit because of the policies that you create. I don't know if I made that clear.
Repeat it again one more time.
Well, if you say this government go to this trust company and say, listen, this outsourcing thing is not going to work. You can't lay off our people that way and outsource your work to Sri Lanka. We're not going to allow that policy. And that they were planning to lay off 20 people. And then say all other trust, this policy goes out now, and then all other trust companies hear this policy, and they don't want that. They want to be able to outsource. They want to minimize their costs and increase their profits, or stay competitive in their market, as it is being said. They will get together and say to the government that, look, if that's a policy that you're going to have, we are going to move to Anguilla, where the government is not so concerned about jobs for their people.
Yeah.
Right? And so in that way, our governments are afraid to make that kind of policy, because then if everybody leaves, then you're talking about thousands of jobs, as opposed to allowing them to outsource, and you're talking about perhaps laying off 20 people here, maybe 20 people there, and you might be able to absorb those people into the economy if the rate of a layoff is not too great or much greater than the production of jobs. I don't know if you got me now?
I understand very clearly.
So I think that's fair. And the question is then, is that fair really founded? And what can be done about those types of situations? Because that's, my father say we got our hand in the lion mode.
Okay.
You can't joke it out one thing.
Well, there's a few things I think we can do. Firstly, to the point about financial services companies traveling to other jurisdictions, we face the same problem when it comes to cruise tourism and some other areas where the foreign investor uses the leverage they have to say, well, if you don't do what it is I say that you do, I'm going to go to this another destination. And what I think different islands or different nation island states have been trying to do for a long time is get an agreement or perhaps about maybe a flat head tax for all the different cruise destinations, which of course has been a challenge because you always have a few different countries who try to get some of the business by giving a lower head tax. So that type of unity is important. I think we would have to do something similar here. It's important to say as well, the laws that allow the trust companies to be able to function here, not easy to get in other places in the world. We don't have any corporate tax here in the Virgin Islands. You know, some years back people would be familiar with the fact that we changed to a payroll tax.
Yes,
to protect the particular industry.
We stopped the income tax. Yes.
Yes, because you didn't want to be taxing local companies and not the international companies.
You couldn't have discriminatory tax practices.
Yeah, which they call ring fencing.
Right.
So we went to the payroll tax. So we don't have any payroll tax, and we don't have any corporate tax here. And imagine how difficult it would be to just go to a country and say, okay, we're going to just get rid of all the corporate tax. It'd have a huge impact on our territory. So a lot of the overseas territories now do not have the corporate tax. And if you would gain some unity among the overseas territories, the other financial services jurisdictions come to an agreement and say, look, employment is important to all our territories. We don't want to see large-scale layoffs of this sort. We don't want to see our people, you know, having to fend for themselves in terms of employment. It's going to cause social impact on all of our societies. This is something that we can agree on, and we should put something together and come up with some unity.
Form some kind of alliance.
Yeah, and this speaks to the importance of unions as well. This is the same principle upon which unions function, and this is the reason, like in the United States of America, for instance, they're outsourcing jobs to places like Asia that don't have unions that can keep the standard of employment high. And most times employers don't like unions because they want to be able to drive the wages down as much as possible, have the least amount of benefits to their employees, and they want to be, you know,
make more money.
Make more. Even, you know, some companies are abroad engaging in child labor. Now we have to take a decision as governments around the world that even though you might be gaining some employment in your particular country, in the long run it's not going to be good for you. You're going to have businesses who are basically exploiting people, and we don't want that. We want people to be able to earn a proper wage, to be able to look after themselves and their families.
Okay, we're going to take a break for a word from our sponsors, and when we come back we're going to go deeper into what these layoffs mean and what this outsourcing, a potential negative impact of this outsourcing is going to be. Keep it locked right here to Spotlight. We're going to be right back after these words from our sponsors.
Spotlight is brought to you by Bolo's High-Tech Printery, Virgin Island Motors, and Clarence Thomas Limited.
Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm Edgy Income here with Shawande, and we're talking about outsourcing of jobs and how some of the businesses in the Virgin Islands are sending the work out to places like Asia that our local people used to perform. Now, Shawande, if this situation continues and we have a development where more and more trust companies are sending more and more of the work out to Asia, where they may be paying $2 a day or $3 a dollar an hour, or whatever the case may be. In any case, it's much cheaper. You're no longer talking about 20 people in one company that did a takeover. You are beginning to talk about 20 people here, 20 people there, and 20 people all around a whole bunch of trust companies. That can present, in my view, a serious problem of not only unemployment, but a path of the economy that depends on those persons to pay rents, for example.
True, and the shop, you know.
Yeah.
For me, it'll have a tremendous impact on the BVI. I think someone told me, actually mentioned to me, that other trust companies are actually watching to see what happens with this particular case, this particular situation, because the Minister of Labor said it's a highly competitive environment, and just like in the United States, where companies outsource, the rest of the companies have to outsource as well, because those companies who you're competing against will have an advantage on you due to the fact that they have cheaper costs.
Yes.
So I don't think the legislators will persuade anybody to stay. I mean, as persuasive as they might be, I think the only thing you could really think about is legislation, that certain aspects of financial services being operated from BVI registered companies should
have to remain in the BVI.
Have to remain in the BVI.
And my understanding is that certain types of work, certain types of paperwork must be done in the BVI, and perhaps that needs to be expanded to include certain other types of paperwork that needs to be processed here as well.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I was actually speaking to somebody who has worked within the industry for decades, and that person told me, way before I knew anything about this situation with the outsourcing, that actually the government here has not protected the industry in terms of employment, that they're just satisfied, and this is part of the reason I said I'm just satisfied just getting some of the fees, because you don't even have to be in the BVI to operate as a BVI lawyer.
Right. Well, I was talking to a high-ranking official in the trust industry a few weeks ago, and it seemed as though there are a couple of models that governments allow in the trust business. One, I think the Anguilla model is where Anguilla is primarily just interested in the fees. They don't compel the companies to hire local people.
Yeah.
Okay, so they could bring in who they want, they could outsource what they want, and they just pay the government the fees. Our tradition and our model has been that we wanted, as in all investments that come into the country, we want our people to get those skills. We wanted the transfer of skills. We want them to get the jobs. We want them to move up the ladder, and eventually be able to branch off and open up their own business. That's a model that we initiated when the tourist industry and the financial services industry were developed. And that's in part the reason for the labor code and BVI Lander Preferred, and the work permit.
Yeah.
The work permit and BVI Lander Preferred was specifically geared to the transfer of skills from the foreign worker to the local worker, and the protection of the Virgin Islander for employment. Right? and the eventual growth of the BVI lender in these industries through the accumulation of the knowledge, as well as being able to have the capital to invest in the country and start their own business. Now, here it is now, approximately 40 years since the trust industry has been, probably more than 40 years since the trust industry has been a major economic sector here in the Virgin Islands, right? And I think we have less than 10 directors of trust companies.
Yeah.
And I think we have about 10 or less than 10 locally owned trust companies. And to me, that says a lot for industry that the skills were supposed to be transferred to us.
Yeah.
And over a 40-year period, we only could have a handful of the persons employed in the trust industry at the highest levels and who can actually own a trust company. So something wasn't done correctly. It seems that though our work permit rules and regulations were not enforced, and the BVI lender preferred was not enforced, and here we have now, and we have a huge immigration challenge as a result of the continual renewal of work permits.
Yeah.
Over 10, 15, 20 years. Then we had to grant Belanger status. Persons put roots down in the country.
Yeah.
We even have a situation where a person on a work permit could get a self-employed work permit for a business license.
Wow.
And then begin to give other people work permits.
Yeah.
You know, so the situation as we allow it to develop have caused us to be at this spot where we are right now, where you hear us now talking, Virgin Islanders talking about other Caribbean people coming and taking their business and taking their jobs and taking their opportunities and so on, not realizing that the other Caribbean people really don't have a job to give or to take, but it is the persons who actually own the businesses, the person that actually owns the economy is who are making these decisions and creating this condition that we all find, all the workers, local and migrant, find themselves in.
Well, the business owners here do not want to be dictated to. And what you're speaking about in terms of that provision in the legislation and the labor code, speaking to the belongers preferred, our legislators have chosen not to challenge the business owners on that one, and that's why you see that provision basically being ignored. And I'll use a statement by the Honorable Kedrick Pickering. Here refer back to this statement to speak about that particular issue concerning the financial services sector. He says, there are certain positions within the financial services sector, for example, that most likely will not be filled by BVI landers. And this is simply because the requisite training and qualification might not be available. Now, I have to tell you, I really don't understand that particular statement about the requisite training and qualification might not be available. I mean, is it some place, this training is some place that we can't access it? Why can't we access it?
It's out of our reach.
Yeah, and at the college we have a Financial Services
Institute.
So
they actually developed specifically to meet the qualification requirements for some of these jobs.
Yeah, so that particular statement is puzzling to me, that this is the reason why we won't be able to get the jobs. However, we expect the industry to embark on an understudy program as stipulated in the Labor Code 2010, where practical, to address this situation. Now, the where practical part worries me about that particular statement. I would have been much more comfortable with the statement if the where practical was not included.
In that as a requirement of the Labor Code.
Yeah,
I don't think,
we will implement an understudy program.
As a matter of fact, I don't think that the where practical is part of the Labor Code statement.
Yeah.
The Labor Code specifically says that if a BVI lander can do the job, the BVI lander needs to do that job, and we need to have BVI landers being trained. That was the reason for the work permit, one of the reasons for the work permit decision and for BVI landlords preferred, the skills transfer. And so when does it become impractical for a company to transfer skills to a BVI lender?
Yeah, and throughout the statement by the Labour Minister, wherever he speaks about enforcing the rights of Virgin Islanders, he uses the term where practical. I could read another one for you. It says, I think that I can say without fear of contradiction that the expatriate sector of the labor force has played a critical role in this territory's development. However, it is my duty as minister responsible for this subject, by extension the government of the BVI, to ensure that there is a balance and that the rights of BVI landers are protected where practical. Now, when is it not practical
to protect the rights of BVI landers?
To protect the rights of BVI landers.
Yes.
And for me, this is an example of successive, I would say, successive ministers of labor who seem to capitulate to the pressure of business owners. Like actually, when the labor code, we had discussions on the labor code, there's a particular provision about work permits that I think I heard, I need to be corrected if I'm wrong, Honorable
Fraser.
No, Omar Hajj.
Omar Hajj, okay.
Who was the last Minister of Labor, said that some of our friends in the business community did not like that particular provision as it pertained to the work permits, maybe the time of the work permits, and they had to take it off the table.
If I remember correctly, it was a clause that said that the work permit was only going to be renewed for 5 years.
Absolutely.
Right? That's you remember?
Yes.
It was 5 years, and that the particularly the trust industry went up in arms.
Yes.
About, and some of the local businesses as well went up in arms about renewing a work permit once you get a worker trained and they got accustomed to the business and they're doing the job that you need them to do. Then here it is, now you have to go and get somebody else because you're no longer going to renew their work permit. And that had to be taken out of the labor code. Now, of course, the purpose that would have served would have been to train a local person for the job. And then after 5 years, which is a reasonable amount of time for training, you could get a bachelor's or master's degree sometimes in a 5-year period, right? Which would have been a reasonable amount of time for training for a local person to take a job, and then the employer would have no longer had to get a work permit for that employee, because then that employee would have grown now accustomed to the job within a 4 or 5 year period. And if they were being trained on the job, they would have known the job within that period, and the expatriate worker would have been able to move on to another jurisdiction or go back to home, and the local employee would have been doing the job, and there would have been no more need for that employer to have a work permit. And so to me, that would have been a benefit to the employer as well. Not to have to go through the hassle of a work permit ever again, because you would have a BVI lander, and if you continue a succession plan, then you would always have BVI landers working, and you wouldn't have to have this work permit problem.
Well, there's the suspicion among some members of the community that there are other reasons why they would like to employ, people. People have it, and to be honest with you, I don't know these people personally. I can't say it with any authority. Some people say that they just want to employ some of their friends from abroad, and they have a preference for employing people who are not Virgin Islanders. Many people are speaking about the skills,
the work ethic,
the attitude.
Yes.
But I guarantee you, I know a lot of people who are very talented individuals, very talented working within the industry, and could run circles around, people in different places. And as well, Edjuenka, that the goalpost seems to be shifting a lot when it comes to being able to access some of those high-level jobs in the industry.
Well, Well, I have said it outright. I have said it outright on I think it was Vigilante Dialogues. I've said outright that there's a element of discrimination being practiced in my view, there's an element of the discrimination being practiced in the trust industry.
Yeah.
Because look at the statistic I gave earlier, where you have over a 40-year period, you don't have 10 local trust companies, and you don't have a fair amount of directors and local people in the top management positions. I mean, does that mean, is that an indication that we are somehow incapable of learning this information?
Yeah.
The other thing is that at first it was that we didn't have the qualifications. We went and we put in a financial services institute in our college with the approval of the same trust industry officials. And when we got the certification and quote-unquote qualifications from the institute, it was that we had no international experience, or we had no experience. So we got into the trust company at the bottom, worked our way to a point, got the experience, went to the institute, got the certification, and then was told after that we didn't have the international experience. And so the goalposts continue to shift, as you have said. No one, the government, none of our representatives ever called up the trust companies and said, we can't continue to allow you to shift the goalposts in this way. Wherever you have said we have complied with, now we want our people to get the jobs. Now, when you look at some of these trust companies, you would have an inexperienced person coming from overseas to the BVI, which is overseas, to be trained by BVI landlords to get overseas experience. But how often do you hear of BVI landlords who have gotten the qualification going to England or going to another jurisdiction to get the international experience? So when I look at that behavior, I mean, the only logical conclusion I can come to is that there's some level of discrimination being practiced in the trust industry, and we don't have our representatives are not paying attention to these types of situations, and we continue to capitulate, acquiesce to the desires of the trust industry out of fear that somehow they're going to pack up and leave, and we are going to be the worse off for it. We have to see how we could remedy that situation when we come back after this break.
This program is sponsored by the law firm of J.S. Archibald & Co. and by the trust company J.S. Archibald Trust Services Limited, both of Rotown, Tortola, BVI.